Howdy, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the Great War, so World War I. So we'll start off with the causes, talk a little bit about the war, the U.S. joining the war, and kind of the outcome. So the kind of catalyst for the war, or at least the linchpin towards the war beginning, not the true causes of the war. The true causes go back decades in Europe, and it's a whole bunch of issues that have been bubbling up for a while. But the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, to speak, is the death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Now, Austria-Hungary is a tenuously held together empire. It's the remnant of Holy Roman Empire. There's about 10 or 12 different nationalities held together in a loose coalition, and it's a powder keg. The emperor and the archduke don't get along. They don't really like each other that much. The Archduke is more liberal, at least as liberal as a noble of this time can be. And the Emperor isn't thrilled about his kind of viewpoint, so he tends to get kind of the crap jobs. So the Archduke and his wife are going to Sarajevo in Bosnia to. So the Archduke and his wife are going to go review the military, shake hands, kiss babies, have the motorcade go on kind of a parade through town. Basically, a good show of the nobles to the people of Bosnia and Sarajevo. Now, there's some tensions in Bosnia about being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria-Hungary wants to control more strongly Bosnia, but also expand its control further south to Serbia. Now, there's a lot of Serbians in Bosnia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and this is an effort to kind of tour everything and make a good show of the experience. However, there's a group of young students, young Bosnian students, that are part of a movement called the Black Hand. And they decide the best way to liberate Bosnia is to assassinate the Archduke. This is kind of counterintuitive. Assassinating the emperor might make some progress. The Archduke was actually more likely to give them what they wanted than the emperor, but nonetheless. They had access to the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and they were going to try to assassinate him. Now, there's about 5 assassins, and they have lined up along the motorcade route that was published. Now, when the first assassin sees the motorcade, he has a bomb. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to participate. And he just doesn't do anything. Another one with the pistol, same thing, and so on and so forth. Each of these assassins decides, no, it's not going to work. Finally, one of the assassins throws a bomb at the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's car. It misses. He actually jumps off a bridge to commit suicide, or breaks the cyanide capsule, jumps off a bridge into the river. The cyanide capsule doesn't work, and the river was too shallow, and he just kind of broke his legs. So he was just sick with broken legs, so it didn't go well. Then it gets to Gavrilo Princip, one of the last assassins. Now, Gavrilo had given up on the assassination attempt because after the bombing failure, the Archduke's caravan had gone a different route. But later in the day, Gavrilo was coming out of a cafe. He saw the Archduke's caravan coming by, an unprinted route, and he pulls out a pistol and he shoots the Archduke and his wife, killing the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. And this is going to be the catalyst that starts an unexpected domino effect all across Europe. Now, remember what I said, the Austro-Hungarian Empire has interests in Serbia. Well, some of these Bosnian students were of Serbian descent. So this is going to give the emperor, while he doesn't really like the Archduke Franz Ferdinand all that much, it gives him an excuse to push for Serbia, to try to take and annex Serbia. So you have Austria-Hungary, you have Sarajevo with Bosnia, with a lot of Serbians, and then kind of southeast, you have the larger Serbia. And Austria-Hungary wants to take and annex Serbia. Well, Austria-Hungary is going to give an ultimatum to Serbia. This is known as the July ultimatum. And it's going to give a whole list of different things that demand that Serbia does certain things in order to alleviate the stresses experienced by Austria-Hungary with the death of their heir. And these were designed to be so onerous that Serbia would have to say no, and then Austria-Hungary could justify going in and annexing Serbia. It turns out that Serbia said, you know what, you're big, you're scary, we will meet all of your demands. You can come in, you can do an investigation, so on and so forth. Like, we'll give representatives, you can do whatever you need, no war. Now, this is not what Austria-Hungary wanted. And this is where things start getting kind of iffy. So you have this ultimatum. So dissolve the nationalist organization, remove Serbian military leaders, accept representatives, participate in investigation and trial, explain why politicians critiqued Austria-Hungary, accept the ultimatum, all these kinds of things. But this is when things kind of fall apart. So Austria-Hungary wasn't expecting Serbia to say yes to this. They thought if Serbia said no, that would justify them going to war and annexing Serbia. So while Serbia is debating this issue, Serbia is made up of a bunch of Slavic people, kind of ethnically Slavic. Russia is the next big Slavic country. So Serbia goes to Russia secretly and says, hey, Russia, you're our big Slavic brother. Do you have our back if Austria-Hungary decides to attack us? And Russia's like, yeah, we got you. So Austria-Hungary, at the same time, goes to Germany, the German Empire. And they say, hey, Kaiser, do you have our back if we decide to invade Serbia no matter what? And Germany says, not only do we have you, here is a blank check, effectively, like we will finance your annexation of Serbia. So this is all done in secret, and all these secret alliances is what's going to cause everything to spiral out of control so quickly. So Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia because they want Serbia, even though Serbia accepted the ultimatum, they declare war. Well, when Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, the secret alliance between Serbia and Russia kicks in. So then Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. And that triggers the secret alliance with Germany. So then Germany declares war on Russia. Now, when Germany declares war on Russia, another secret alliance kicks in. And that's going to be the one between France and Russia. So then Russia gets an ally, and France declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Then Germany and Austria-Hungary declare war back on France, and that triggers another secret alliance, and the United Kingdom, Britain, declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. And so you have this spiral rapidly out of control as the war erupts. And then later, the Ottoman Empire will come in on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. So you have Turkey or the Ottoman Empire being the other power. Japan will come in as an allied power. They don't make a significant effort in the war, but they will make some moves in Asia predominantly that will kind of lay the foundation for what's going to happen in the years leading up to World War II. Now, the US. At first, we really don't care about World War I. We have our own stuff at home. We're staying out of the war. This war is bad. It's raging of all kinds. You have new technology being used for the first time in this war. You have machine guns. You have trench warfare. You have new types of artillery. You have gas warfare. But the US initially is going to stay out. But as tensions build between the US and Germany, several factors are going to push us towards war. One of the big ones is submarine warfare. Submarines are relatively new technology for World War I, and Germany makes heavy use of submarines. They do this primarily in the form of attacking shipping. They want to deprive resources from making their way to the European continent. So the English Channel is going to be big. Shipping from the United States is going to be a big target. And they're sinking anything that could help England, France, Russia. They're trying to destroy those ships. And a lot of those ships are the United States. Because the United States is holding a position that says, we're neutral in this, so we can sell to both sides. Now, that's never a good deal. If you're trying to sell to two sides of a fight, one side at least is going to get mad, if not both. And in this case, Germany is going to hit us first. It's going to get worse when a British cruise liner, the HMS Lusitania, gets destroyed by one of these submarines. It gets sunk. And the Lusitania had 128 Americans on it. Now, the Germans claim they were transporting weapons secretly in the cargo hold. And they might have been. But the fact that 128 Americans get killed, it's going to push the United States closer and closer towards war. So, Lusitania, one more step towards war. But Wilson is going to run for re-election, Woodrow Wilson, and he's going to win on the premise of keeping America out of war. He wins with a big margin. Germany ramps up their submarine warfare. They start sinking more and more ships, thinking if they can cut the United States out, stop all the supplies from the United States, they can defeat the British and the French before the United States can join the war. On top of that, the British release a telegram that was sent in secret between the Germans and the Mexicans, where Germany basically asked Mexico, will you invade the United States? And if you do, once Germany defeats England and France, we will come to Mexico and help you retake all the territories lost in the Mexican-American War. Now, Mexico said no, but nonetheless, Americans are furious at this. We're mad at the Mexicans a little bit. Texas gets really mad at the Mexicans for whatever reason, just our long-standing tension with Mexico. But America is really pissed at the Germans. So there's a newspaper talking about how Texans are enraged at this proposal. Nonetheless, Woodrow Wilson, as a result of the submarine warfare, the sinking of the Lusitania, and now the Zimmerman telegram, decides to join the war. So what do? We got to get ready for this war. We gear up for war, so we need two things. We need soldiers and we need money. So we begin enlisting and drafting a lot of troops, and we start selling war bonds to raise money. So part of it comes from taxes, part of it comes from war bonds. So we recruit, and we recruit a lot of soldiers. We're going to drastically increase our troop supply. So we only had about 120,000 troops in the U.S. Army. About 24 million men will register for the draft, and about 2.5 million will be drafted. Another 2 million volunteered, bringing the number to almost 5 million. So in 2 years, we went from 120,000 soldiers to 5 million. So we have our army. We start with war bonds and everything else, and we're ready to get into the war. So when we look at the war, we kind of have two major fronts. So you have the Western Front, which is between mainly Germany and France, and you have the Eastern Front, which is between Russia and Germany, Austria-Hungary. There's going to be fighting between Russia and Bulgaria and Turkey, and then stuff going on in Greece and Italy that we'll talk about a little bit later. But you have a lot of new technology. Planes are being used for the first time. Automobiles are going to be used for the first time. You have the invention of the tank. No one's sure how to use the tank at first, but nonetheless, it actually gets the name tank from the British. They're trying to hide what they were, and they called them mobile water tanks to try to hide that they were actually armored artillery. But nonetheless, you have tanks, you have new high-powered artillery, submarines like we talked about. You have Gatling guns and automatic machine guns, and then you have barbed wire being used on the battlefield. And all of this is going to lead to trench warfare. You even see the use of gas, but by the end of the war, most nations have given up on gas because it's so unpredictable. When you blow up a bomb with gas and it has a big cloud of toxic gas, sometimes it blows towards your enemy, but if the wind blows against you after the bomb is dropped, your own soldiers are going to die. So they don't really like that. So we're going to run through some of the big battles. We're not going to go into too much depth. You don't need to know all the details. But you have the first big battle of the war is the Battle of the Marne. This is when Germany invades through Belgium, makes it almost to Paris, and then what's called the Miracle of the Marne happens, where the French and the British manage to push the Germans back to this kind of solid red line. And that's pretty much, aside from some very minor moves, where the battle line stays for the rest of the war. Like they start digging in, they dig big trenches, and they don't really move a whole lot. And that's what's going to make the war so bloody, is because there's no movement, there's no achievement in most of these battles. It's just a loss of an astronomical amount of life. You have the Battle of Kosovo on the Eastern Front. This is when the Serbian forces get quickly defeated, unsurprisingly, and they're forced to retreat, and they're going to lose an army of about 30,000 soldiers. Back in the west, you have the Battle of the Somme. This is a massive battle where the French and the British attack the Germans, and over the course of several months, this is the only kind of advance they make, is this little bulge. And it's not particularly a huge move, but these are the moves that we see in World War I, and they're only achieved at the cost of astronomical amounts of life. The Battle of Verdun is an interesting one. This was a German plan to capture the French city of Verdun, which was a big railroad hub. And the idea was the Germans are going to punch through the defensive line of the French, take the city of Verdun, hold it, and then just wait for the French and the British to attack to retake the city, and then kill as many as they can. In their words, they were going to bleed them white. Basically, just kill them until there weren't any troops left to fight. Not a sophisticated battle plan, but nonetheless, it's going to lead to a total of 714,000 casualties in a little less than a year. So over 370,000 French and almost 340,000 Germans. So this is about 70,000 casualties killed or wounded every month. And this is when the United States enters the war on April 2nd. Now, our troops would be valuable for the war, but we're going to bring something more important. We're going to bring supplies. And when we arrive, it's led by General John Pershing. He's kind of credited with saying, "Nous voilà Lafayette," or "Lafayette, we are here." And that's actually Colonel Charles Stanton that says it, but nonetheless, he's hearkening back to when the French came to rescue the United States during the American Revolution, and they sent Lafayette, the general, to help Washington. He's saying, "We are here to return the favor, France. You helped us in our time of need. Now we are here to help France." So our troops arrive, and that's helpful. But it's truly our supplies, our foodstuffs, our weapons, our equipment that's really going to save the war. While the Germans are starving on their trenches, the British and the French are getting a new wave of supplies from the Americans. And this is what's going to allow the Allies to win the war. Now, the Germans make a weird move to save food. They think pigs eat a lot of food, a lot of the grains that we could be feeding our people. So they do something called Schweinmord. This is the death of the pig. So they slaughter virtually every pig in Germany. They do this so they don't have to keep feeding pigs. They think, oh, we'll have all this meat for a while, and then all the grain next season will be able to go towards the war effort. What they didn't calculate is almost all the fertilizer used for these crops that helped grow them came from pigs. So not only did they not have any pigs, but the crops actually produced dramatically less since they didn't have any manure from the pigs to grow the crops. So this dealt a devastating blow to the food and supply resources for Germany. The next big battle is Passchendaele, so in the north. Now this one's interesting. It's the beginning where the British implement what's called bite and holds, where very small crawl forward. And it does pretty good, but nonetheless, it's still a slow grind of a war. So you can kind of see what happens during the Battle of Passchendaele. It turns what's called no man's land into a virtual hellscape. There's nothing left of the world in this area. Even for decades after the war, some of this land is going to be uninhabitable because there's so many unexploded ordnance that it's too dangerous to live in some of these places or farm. Even today, they occasionally still find, a bomb here or there that never exploded or a shell from an artillery. Now, this is when Italy kind of makes their decision. Now, initially, Italy had sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Then Italy decides, oh, we actually want some territory that Austria-Hungary has, so they switch sides in the middle of the war and attack Austria-Hungary. So basically, Italy controlled everything in black, and all these red things were controlled by other countries, but had high Italian populations. And Italy was saying, oh, we need to reunite Italians in the greater Italy. And they were using this as a justification to attack Austria-Hungary. Now, there's only one major naval battle of the war, the Battle of Jutland. This is the British versus the Germans. And the British basically destroy the German fleet. It goes back to Germany, never leaves again. And Germany learns an important lesson about naval warfare. Don't oppose the British on the surface of the ocean. So no more surface fleets for Germany. By the time we get to World War II, they're going to be primarily, almost exclusively, a submarine navy. So this is when they shift over to primarily submarines. Now, on the Eastern Front, you have kind of one major push called the Brusilov Offensive. And this is where the Tsar kind of takes over as the main commanding general. He fires his general and takes over himself, the Tsar of Russia, the leader of Russia. And he basically launches an attack on all fronts. So every army unit in the Russian army attacks at once. After some initial success, it grinds down and Germany begins pushing them back. And it's a huge catastrophe for the Russians. So much so that Tsar Nicholas is faced with Vladimir Lenin returning to Russia, to St. Petersburg, and leading the Bolshevik Revolution, which will result in Tsar Nicholas being overthrown, he and his entire family eventually being executed, and a communist government being set up in Russia. Now, there's a Russian Civil War which is crazy, and there's a Russian Civil War during World War I, and eventually the Reds, so there's three factions, the Reds, the Whites, and the Greens, but the communists, the Reds, come out on top, and they sue for a separate peace with Germany. So basically they make a peace, get out of the war, and abandon England and France. So you have a final grind towards the end of the war. Now, while all this is happening in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Turks are taking this opportunity with a distraction of war to begin purging the Armenian people within their empire. Now, there was no inherent reason to do this other than they didn't like the Armenians. But you have this Armenian genocide, which is not nearly as recognized as the Jewish Holocaust during World War II, but it's almost as equally as bad. This was like a predecessor to what happened to the Jews. And the Armenians are devastated during World War I. So massive death, massive execution, mass graves are found during and after the war. It is a horrific event. Now, by November 11th, you have Armistice Day. This is where the war's not over yet, but the fighting has stopped. You have a famous quote, on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, the fighting was stopped. So this is the Armistice Day. Woodrow Wilson goes over to Europe to meet at the Treaty of Versailles. He takes with him something called the 14 points. 14 points he thinks needs to be included in the treaty to end future warfare. Now, they had a variety of things, but only one of them will actually be accepted. They pretty much dismiss Wilson and his 14 points because the Americans were only in the war for a few months. It was an important contribution, but they did not endure much suffering compared to the other nations. So they meet at the Treaty of Versailles. So you have the Treaty of Versailles. If you've never seen Versailles, Versailles is the old French king's palace on the outskirts of Paris. So Alsace and Lorraine is a piece of territory between Germany and France that's always up for grabs, always in contention, and France will take this territory. The Saarlands, big oil fields, are going to be taken from Germany and given to France. Poland, Finland, Lithuania, and Czechoslovakia are carved out and created as kind of independent territories. Now, places like Czechoslovakia basically take a whole bunch of different ethnic groups and shove them together, and that's going to be a problem that's going to contribute to World War II. All the German colonies are split up between the French and the British. The German army is capped at 100,000 soldiers. The German Navy is capped at 36 ships. And the big hit for the Germans is because the Germans basically supported Austria-Hungary's bid for the war. The Germans get the bill for the war of $33 billion. That means every year the Germans have to pay to England and France the debt of $33 billion. So over the next however many years it takes to pay off, they're going to be paying this debt. And finally, they create the League of Nations. This is supposed to be like a predecessor to the UN, and it's supposed to be where people can come together, nations can come together and negotiate before war begins. Now, if World War I wasn't bad enough, right at the tail end of World War I, you get the Spanish flu. And this is going to kill between 30 and 50 million people. Now, we have a little mini lecture elsewhere that will talk a little bit more about the Spanish flu, but this is insult to injury, salting the wound of the Great War. And this leaves us back in the United States in the 1920s. And this is when you're going to have massive cultural and societal change, and you have these two aspects of America that are going to be at contention. You have the rural aspect and the city aspect that are trying to balance each other out, and all this cultural and societal change are going to fuel a huge backlash in the United States. So we think of the Roaring Twenties as this time of excess, kind of Great Gatsby-esque world, but there's also a darker side that we'll talk about as well. It's one of the reasons why it's called the Gilded Age. But we'll stop there for today, and we'll pick up with that next time. Have a great day.